So much is happening on the foreign scene in relation with Nigeria's diplomatic ties. Delegates at the ruling African National Congress Leadership Conference voted on Monday to keep Cyril Ramaphosa, the current president of South Africa, as head of the party, with 2,476 voting for him and 1,897 for his rival, former Health Minister Zweli Nkisi. Ramaphosa's re-election opens the way to his second term as South Africa's president, as the ANC has an absolute majority in parliament, which selects the head of state. Also, earlier in the week, President Muhammadu Buhari returned to Abuja after a week-long visit to Washington, D.C., where he attended the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit. The news agency of Nigeria reports that while in Washington, the Nigerian leader also participated actively at the U.S.-Nigeria Business and Investment Forum. Speaking at the forum, Buhari said Nigeria remains the best destination for American investors to put their money. Joining us now on this show to discuss the re-election of Cyril Ramaphosa as ANC leader and President Muhammadu Buhari's attendance at the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit is Professor Bolaji Akinyemi, Nigeria's former Minister of Foreign Affairs. Good morning, Prof, and thank you for joining us on the morning show.
Good morning, Dr. Abati. Good morning, Ayo. Compliments of the season.
Compliments of the season to you, sir.
Well, Prof, Cyril Ramaphosa survived the threat of impeachment, threat, and then he also managed to shrug off the allegations of involvement in fraud at his farm, the Falafala farm. And then on top of that, he managed to emerge again as leader of the ANC, despite the opposition from former President Jacob Zuma and others. Now, is the storm over for him? Now that he has to go to election later in the future as president seeking a second term in office.
Well, thank you for having me on your show this morning. One factor missing from your intro, on which I would like to hang my contribution, is the fact that when the news filtered out that the ANC had voted him in as their leader, the market showed considerable improvement. And that is the key to understanding the conundrum that we face in South Africa. You see, an unholy agreement was made at the end of, as we transited from the apartheid regime to the ANC government. They made a deal, an unholy deal. And the deal was, we give you political independence, political rights, and you leave us, the white people, the business community, with running the business the way as it is. We will, of course, take on board some of you leaders to make sure that you benefit from the profits of the business community. How you do it, we don't really care, but you will leave the business alone. This unholy deal was what got independence and black rights in South Africa. We all applauded at that time because we were not aware of this unholy deal. And that will explain why every leader, every president of post-apartheid South Africa had come to a sticky end, had left office under very spurious and very undignified circumstances. Please, I know, not Mandela, but the reason Mandela was never accused of anything is because he was Mandela, and nobody was going to touch him. But if you look at the house where he lived until he died in South Africa, I mean, how did he buy that? While in prison, was that from his prison wages? Of course, that was the house given to him by the Oppenheimer family. That was his own sweet deal. And there were other sweet deals for Mandela. But once Mandela then left, Thabo Mbeki was seen off, accused of corruption. Zuma was seen off, accused of corruption. And now you have Cyril Ramaphosa accused of corruption. And instead of doing what the others have done, which is, okay, I'm sorry, I've been caught with my sticky fingers in the jar of corruption, I will leave. He decided no, he wasn't going anywhere. And he faced down the allegation. Now, you ask yourself, was this the South Africa that people died for? Recall Samora Machel, president of Mozambique, who died in that mysterious aircraft crash. Remember Ruth First, who was blown up by the agents of the South African regime. Remember the bombing runs, the bombing raids into Zimbabwe, into Zambia, against ANC operatives, as well as others who were there. Even in the case of Nigeria, we contributed money, we contributed arms. We could have been doing a lot of economic deals, for which is what we are doing now. I mean, Nigerian market is flooded with South African goods. We could have been doing this at a cheaper rate under apartheid. We made that sacrifice. We gave all of this up. You now ask yourself, for what? It has now become evident. And one of the things which I even find, which we should throw into the maelstrom of the analysis that we are doing, is that Parliament that set up the judicial body ended up rejecting the report of that body, or not adopting it when it was brought to it. I find that really amazing. So what is happening to Ramaphosa? Who is next? Who is going to be clean? Because the gentleman, the health minister that you referred to, Dr. Abati, he himself was thrown out of the cabinet by Ramaphosa because of allegations that state funds that I think were supposed to be meant for whether it was COVID-19 or HIV, that there were malfeasance in the way in which those funds. To think that that was the alternative doesn't mean that there's no clean person in the ANC who could aspire to be president of that republic. So I think that what we had hoped for, that perhaps South Africa would be the shining light of clean government when we think of, the big names of the involved in the ANC struggle, that at least they fought for their rights. They know who died for their rights. But they were outwitted at the end of the day. I think it's a shame what has happened in South Africa. Please, don't get me wrong, I hold my hands up. South Africa is not the only country in Africa that is guilty of corrupt government. We don't even need to scratch our heads too high if it's in an exam. Name corrupt government in Africa. That will be the soft question that any candidate that attempts it, will get 100%. All over Africa, unclean hands, in the presidency. So I'm not calling out South Africa. It's because, well, that's the issue. You asked me to come and discuss that. I'm focused on South Africa today.
All right, thank you very much, Professor Akinyemi, and for detailing and even going down history lane with regards to the endemic corruption in South Africa from the apartheid regime and now even to its democratic rule. Now, following a 3-year inquiry, a report was released into the corruption crisis in South Africa. A report was released, and the final findings led by the justice the findings was that from Zuma to Ramaphosa, even though Ramaphosa came on board with a big anti-corruption fight, corruption hasn't been tackled under his administration. And what they're actually proposing is that perhaps one thing that could work would be changing a reform of the electoral process, whereby South Africans can vote directly for their leaders as opposed to through the ruling party. What's your take on this stance?
Thank you very much, Ayo. The recommendation is addressing an issue that an issue that was put into the Constitution to almost guarantee a perpetual control of the electoral system by the ANC. That's just how you could have, how you could have a constitutional provision that says it is the parliament that elects the president based on nominations from the ANC convention. So, first of all, it's not even the whole of the ANC that makes the nomination. It is the National Working Committee or National Executive Committee. So you have creamed off the electorate, and then you take that to Parliament. The presidency in South Africa then could never claim that it represents the will of the people. And that's why the panel, headed by former Chief Justice, recommended that let the people vote. Let the people's voice be heard. The whole people, not just the ANC, not just one party. Now, one could understand why during the time of transition from the apartheid regime to majority African rule, why that provision would be put in. It was almost to compensate ANC for all that struggle, all that sacrifice, all the people who died in Soweto, people like Steve Biko, even Chris Hani. Chris Hani was assassinated, brutally because he was opposed to the kind of deal that the ANC and the white minority regime was working out, which has resulted where we are. Chris Hani was opposed to it, and he was assassinated by a white right-wing element. The time has come to revisit that. The ANC has now proved, like all parties in the world that fought for gracious values, that's now proved that once it has got into power, it has forgotten all those gracious values and has descended itself into into the gutter of corruption and malfeasance and misgovernance and whatever other terms that you want to use. And so I think the panel was right to say, okay, let the people, not just some people, the whole people, those at least who want to vote. And here, let me say that it may even become worth it for us to copy the Australian model, which makes it illegal for people not to vote. So you just don't sit in your house on election day, and then at the end you moan, you condemn the kind of government that those who've been bribed to give up their PVC and what have you, the kind of government that then emerges from such a corrupt system. In Australia, it is illegal for you not to vote. And so I would really suggest that not only in South Africa, but also in Africa, we should make it illegal for people not to vote, not to exercise that right.
Okay, Prof. Yeah, I think it's understandable if the business community in South Africa is excited that Cyril Ramaphosa has been re-elected ANC leader, because after all, he's business friendly. So they will be excited. But how about the ordinary people who have not been well served in 5 years of Cyril Ramaphosa's presidency? Power cuts, Eskom holdings cannot provide power, job crisis, unemployment is 32.9%, and then of course you have the ANC divided right down the middle. The question is, this second opportunity that President Ramaphosa has been given, does it really guarantee that the ANC will win in the next election cycle? And is Ramaphosa in a position to renew, re-energize the ANC? Because I don't imagine that those fronting for Zuma and Zuma himself are likely to back off.
Let me answer your second question first, which you have actually partially provided the answer. Ramaphosa is one of them, one of the business elite. He had been co-opted. Recall that under Under Mandela, under Mbeki, he was not within the government. He was within business circles. And recall that it was one of the mining companies of which he was a non-executive director that authorized the police shooting down miners who were protesting for improvement in their wages and improvement in their working conditions. And when he was asked about that, he never criticized the police action. That's so. He had been co-opted into the business community. So don't expect anything from him. And in any case, again, I said this earlier, the Constitution and the business package that was agreed to by the ANC at independence did not take into consideration the interests of the majority of the blacks. And that is why, and the blacks are aware of this. But unfortunately, they have focused their anger or they are targeting the unfortunate African immigrants who have come from countries that supported the ANC and who felt that, well, the post-apartheid South Africa is going to be a friendly country. Well, it has not been. The xenophobia that we have seen in South Africa is very un-African. And why do I say this? There's no African country that does not have immigrants in it. It's part of our culture. I mean, after all, the South Africans themselves found their home in Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Botswana, and even as far up north here as Nigeria. They were welcomed, and provisions were made to make them comfortable. So it's very un-African. Xenophobia is very un-African. Okay, yes, occasionally there are disturbances, but it has almost become a system in South Africa. The anger of the South African blacks who have been dealt out at independence had now been focused on fellow Africans who happen to be immigrants in South Africa. That is not going to change. There's no way that Ramaphosa is going to now become what is that name of that president of Zimbabwe who they finally overthrown? I've forgotten his name. Anyway, but there's no way that Ramaphosa is going to address the fundamental issues of economic restructuring in South Africa. So they're just going to continue to stumble, and the issues are going to get, the economic conditions of the black South Africans going to continue to get worse.
All right, thank you very much. Just to move away from South Africa and talk about the US-Africa Summit, which our president, Nigeria was a part of, represented there by a strong delegation led by the President of the Federal Republic, President Muhammadu Buhari. Now, some of the things, the outcome from the 3-day summit is the announcement by the President of the United States of America, President Biden, that the US was entering into a $55 billion worth trade deal with Africa. Spoke about a few other policies he was committing himself to. Now, the US-Africa Summit was launched by the previous administration of President Barack Obama, and the last summit of this kind was held in 2018. Some people have questioned the timing and the reason for the renewed interest of the United States in engaging with Africa, particularly in trade. Others have analyzed or perhaps criticized the amount of money that has been committed by the United States for the entire continent, while for others it's talking about how Nigeria can best leverage these kinds of opportunities and relationships. I'd like to ask you, sir, what your general overview of the US-Africa Summit and how best Nigeria can position itself to leverage the $55 billion investment?
Thank you, Ayo, for your broadly phrased issues that you want me to address on this matter. Let me start off by saying I am not a supporter or friend of the kind of summit that the African continent has got itself into. I am not. One leader somewhere summoning a whole continent, this time 49 heads of states, other times it's more than that, and they all pack their bags and they go. It is not the kind of diplomacy that I studied and that I understood to be the parameters for diplomatic engagement. You see, this type, the French started it when at independence they came up with parameters that will ensure France continues to monitor and continues to engage its former colonies on terms dictated by France. I think on this program we have talked about the colonial pact which which France forced its colonies to sign as a condition for independence. Again, for people who might not have listened to that program, part of the colonial pact was that they will not have a currency of their own. The currency will be, for all of them, will be linked to the French franc. It will be, now even the new Italian prime minister had just told us that all that currency is printed in France, and the African countries are charged for the printing. The amount of money that the African countries get from their external trade, 85% of that must be deposited in France, in the central bank in France, where only 15% is available for the African countries to trade with. And if they need more, they have to apply. And the money granted them is then granted them at commercial rates for using their own money. All their military officers must be trained in French institutions. If you discover a mineral in their country, it's a French company that must be given the concession to mine that mineral. I can go on and on and on and on. The French then started this annual summit, the France and the French-speaking African countries. Then others followed it as a pattern. Now you have Turkey African Summit, Japanese African Summit, Chinese African Summit. Excuse me, what is next? You have of course you have the United States African Summit. It is not. I'm not fond of that kind of pattern. Probably it will even be more acceptable to me if you were to rotate the way the Commonwealth does, because I can understand somebody now saying, but how about the Commonwealth to which Nigeria belongs to? Don't we have it's not the same. The format of the British Commonwealth is not the same. Number one, it is now rotated. The last one was held in Kigali, Rwanda. It has been held in Nigeria. Number two, their secretariat, citizens from different Commonwealth countries are eligible to be the Secretary General of the Commonwealth rather than the British Foreign Minister. So, I mean, it's not the same. So I'm not a friend of it at all. Who picks the agenda, for example? The last the United States African Summit, who picked the agenda? The Americans kept saying, we will listen to the Africans. But, I mean, I tried to follow the conversations that were held, and the elephant in the room was the involvement of China in Africa that America is not happy about. And even though they said they are not going to force any African countries to choose, there is no doubt. I mean, we are not babies in diplomacy. There is no doubt that, when it comes to political issues, which we have seen, which we have seen on the Russian-Ukrainian thing, countries remind you of what they have done for you when they are then asking you for your support on political issues at the United Nations. They remind you of that as if you owe them for what they have done. Number 3, this sum of money, if you read, if you listen to the subtones, it's not guaranteed. Congress has to vote on that money. The Americans are very clever in the way their constitution has been designed. So the president can make promises, but it is Congress, when it comes to financial issues, that decides how money is voted and how money is spent, and which one of these financial commitments finally, are actualized. So don't hold your breath thinking, how much is Nigeria going to get? How much is Africa going to get out of this 50-something billion? I'm not sure. Not with the Republicans who now control the House of Representatives. You've got a divided Congress, and the Americans know. When you have a divided Congress, you have a lame duck president. And that is often why even the American government shuts down at times when Congress refuses to vote money to even run the United States. So don't hold your breath on this issue of financial allocation. The more, the merrier in terms of investors coming into Africa. At least where you have the Chinese building east-west road, and you have the Americans doing this one, and you have maybe Turkey supplying your weapons and this and that. It gives you, the recipient, some leverage, in the sense that no country can then grind you to a halt because they are not happy with the way you voted at the United Nations. So, to that extent, we should welcome as many nations becoming interested in Africa, investing in Africa, because it gives us a kind of a balancing of interest. But having said that, I hope we are going to put a stop to this model of, all African leaders being summoned, whether it's to Washington or to Tokyo or to Peking or wherever. Because my fear is the next thing we will hear is that, I don't know, some country you've never heard of is also summoning all African leaders to come and have a summit.
Okay, Prof, without a doubt, Africa is being treated like a ward or a stepchild within the international system. The same countries that would not admit any African country into the G20 or allow Africa a permanent seat on the Security Council are scrambling for Africa. Even Vietnam, Malaysia, they are also, don't be surprised, Prof, if they summon African leaders and our leaders go there. But the question is, how should African leaders manage this latest scramble for Africa and project the African interest? Because it looks like our leaders just go to these summits just for photo opportunities and to be seen to be taking pictures with other world leaders. But what is that strategic African interest that Africa must target? Maybe individually, maybe as a group.
Dr. Abati, you are starting to sound like President Kagame of Rwanda, because that's precisely the issue that he has raised. You go there without your own agenda to face a country that has its own specific agenda targeting you. And I think that there are three things that we need to do. Number one is actually to reject this format so that they are not regarded as being rude. I have suggested rotation of the venue, and the chairman of of whatever the summit is, you rotate it. If African leaders come to your country this year, the next one will have to be held in Africa. At least it will change the perception and the atmosphere of, a master-servant relationship. Number two, the African Union is there. The African Union should sit up and define agenda for Africa on current issues, and not just have this again annual meetings, which you ask yourself what decisions have been taken at the last summit, and I scratch my head, I can't really remember. The AU should sit up. It now has a job to do. If the focus is going to be on membership of the G20, what will you even discuss there when you are given a seat? What will you discuss there? Will the Americans or the Chinese have told you, well, now AU, you are representing Africa at G20, we welcome you, what would you like to have? And then the chairman of the AU says, I don't have a mandate to discuss any specifics, but we are happy to be here. That's not the kind of representation that we want. The issue of African membership of the Security Council is still outstanding. And let us be fair, it is the inability of Africa to resolve the issue of how many seats does it want, who will be the beneficiary of this, that actually holding up the issue of African representation in the Security Council of the UN. There are other issues within Africa itself, and one is that of Western Sahara. I laughed so much I almost fell off my seat each time they strained to refer to Morocco as an African country. Yes, geographically Morocco is located in Africa, but if you look at Moroccan diplomatic positions on a lot of African issues, they are always voting against the African position. And on Western Sahara, for example, they've refused the African Union position on Western Sahara. And please don't forget that even Morocco applied to join the European Union. That application was rejected. So in a way, we even have this big issue of what is Africa? Who is an African? And there are people, not only within academic circles, but also within, although quietly, they don't say it out loud, who feel that the African Union, like its predecessor, the OAU, is badly configured.
Yes.
But not to drag the debate into another area. Those are the three issues that I would say. One, rotate the venue,
yes,
rotate the chairmanship. Two, the African Union itself should sit down before any summit and decide the agenda that they themselves, will pursue.
Absolutely. Thank you so very much for such an insightful conversation. Professor Bolaji Akinyemi, former Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Federal Republic of Nigeria.